please welcome Semafor General Manager and Global Head of Public Affairs, Bennett Richardson.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here. I'm Bennett Richardson, General Manager and Global Head of Public Affairs at Semafor. And thank you for being here for betting on the future of U.S. gaming. Semafor is just under 2 years old. We've already built a remarkable team with newsrooms here in Washington, New York, London, San Francisco, across Africa. And some big news for us this week, we launched in the Middle East with Semafor Gulf at the beginning of the week. So we've got now reporters and editors in Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and beyond. So if you're following the economics of that region, definitely give us a subscribe at semafor.com. Really excited for you all to be here today to talk about the gaming industry and responsible gaming, such an amazing economic growth story and transformation as more and more states adopt gaming, and it's a part of Responsible Gaming Month this month. Really thank our partners at American Gaming Association for making today's conversation possible. You heard from some great perspectives in both the public and private sector. We've got investor and team owner Mark Ein joining us in a moment. We've got some great gaming executives from DraftKings and MGM National Harbor, as well as Representative Dina Titus from Nevada, one of the leads of the Gaming Caucus. So a great congressional perspective there as well. Before we get started, would like to invite up Bill Miller, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the American Gaming Association, to help get us started with a few remarks. So Bill, please.
Thanks, sir. All right. Good morning, everybody. Really appreciate everybody coming out here today. This is it's an important. The number of people that we're going to have out here today. It's really important because we are in Responsible Gaming Education Month, and this is an important time for us to showcase the commitment that the gaming industry has to responsible gaming. And as an industry, we cannot be successful without making our customers first. And so all month, what we spend time doing is highlighting what our members are doing to train employees, to make sure customers understand what we do and how we make sure that responsibility is baked into everything that we do. Whether it's training, whether it's research, whether it is allowing our partners, and some which you will hear later today, understand the importance of responsibility to the customer, responsibility as good community citizens. And part of that really comes from our growth. And we're really talking today about sports betting, but the industry's growth has been pretty remarkable since the Supreme Court ruled in 2018 that we could legalize sports betting. And we now have 2/3 of adult Americans that can legally bet in this country. And so as our commitment and growth continues, our commitment to making our industry responsible has to continue. And we are doing that every single day. So it's really important. I'm so glad that you're all here, and I really hope you enjoy the rest of this program. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you, Bill. I'm excited to welcome up Mark Ein, venture capitalist and entrepreneur, limited partner of the Washington Commanders, who's joined and interviewed by Alana Shore, our senior Washington editor. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. I'm here with Mark Ein, a prolific venture capitalist who both owns and part owns several Washington area sports teams, including the Commanders. He's going to discuss the risk of the rise of online betting, and how it's changing the relationship between teams and their fans. And my first question is, how have things changed on the Commanders specifically, and how do you see growth of the franchise differently, if at all? Because online betting, just to give you guys some stats, it's now estimated as a $10 billion annual business, but the market at maturation, per Goldman Sachs, could reach $45 billion.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be here with Semafor. So just by way of background, I grew up actually in Chevy Chase, and the two things I cared the most about when I was a young boy were the football team, and I used to go to all the games with my dad at RFK, and the tennis tournament where I was a ball kid. And so now today I feel really lucky that I'm the owner of the tennis tournament and one of the partners who put the Commanders deal together, and I spend a lot of time on it. We just took over a year ago, so I'll talk about gaming and gambling in a second. But and I see my friend Joe Maloney, who was part of the team for a long time. Really an amazing, really sad that he's no longer there. He was an amazing member of our leadership team. But we have a lot to do there. That is a fan base that used to be one of the biggest in the NFL. We actually were #1 in the league in ticket sales in 2008. And when we took it over in last year, 2023, we were last. I went from first to last. And so there's a lot of things we're doing to try to build it back to be the best in the league, which we think it should be. We think this market is the best, one of the best markets in the United States for football. Separate from the Commanders, just broadly across sports, the thing about gaming is it is a massive driver of fandom. And whether I look at it from my tennis lens or my football lens, when people are involved in gaming, their level of engagement in the sport and when they watch it goes up massively. They watch it more. They watch more games or matches, and they watch them longer. One stat that's amazing is when you look at people who are betting on a football game, if the game's a blowout, the engagement, like people who stick with it, it goes up 20 percentage points if they're betting. And the people who turn it off, it gets cut in half. So it's not just are you watching it, it's like how engaged you are. In tennis, 80% of tennis bets happen after the match starts. So and this was like one of the big aha moments to me. It's not like, oh, I'm going to go bet who's going to win or lose. It's who's going to win the next game, who's going to get the next ace, who's going to break serve next, all this stuff. And what you really realize when you think about it is the relationship between sport and gaming it's like entertainment amplification. If you watch something, you have a certain level of engagement. If you watch something and you have something at stake, your level of engagement goes up massively. Now, that's a super positive if you want to attract fans. Obviously, you want to put guardrails around it, and there's a huge set of regulations, every league I'm involved in is maniacal about making sure the guardrails are set. And long before this was legal, this was happening in the shadows. And one of the big motivations for bringing it out of the shadows was so that we could have sunlight on it and then put these guardrails around it, which whether it's the tennis tours or the NFL or the teams themselves, everyone is really committed to doing.
Interesting. You mentioned, obviously, the risks and potential toll. It's not just for bettors that guardrails might need to be discussed, but also for the players. I was particularly struck by a study the NCAA did that said 1 in 3 of their star athletes faces harassment from bettors who are like, you missed that field goal, damn you. How has that affected players in your view? Do you see it as different in pro sports? Because this was a study of college athletes, and what can be done about that?
Yeah, so the first, I just want to be clear. This was all happening before gaming was legal. It was actually worse because you couldn't do anything about it. You couldn't see it. It wasn't there. It was totally separate from the teams in the leagues. Now the fact that it's become legal, everyone can really work on the guardrails and the protections. It is, I mean, I see it mainly from a tennis perspective. I have a lot of friends who are on tour, and some of them, like the comments they post online because they just want people to see it. It's brutal. But honestly, most of them are trolls who have like 4 followers. And I think when you look at it, it's like anything you do that you're high profile, you're going to get that noise in the system. And I think they're pretty good at blocking it out. But like, again, whether it's the tennis tours, whether it's the NFL, every single NFL team has someone assigned to them to work on this issue. And it's not just during the games, it's at practice facilities, it's in the stadium, it's everywhere. And everyone's really focused on trying to, as I said, put the guardrails around this and protect the players and the integrity of the game.
Mm-hmm. To pivot to tennis for a moment, since it's already come up, you've talked before about the importance of repairs to the Rock Creek Tennis Center, to the future of the Mubadala City Open. Yeah. Talk more about that if you can. Give us an update on how things are going with the city and the Park Service and whether we can expect to all see TFO play next year.
We can definitely see Francis here next year. He's He's the best local kid. Like me, grew up with the tournament being a big part of his life, and now he made the semifinals of the U.S. Open, and comes back to town all the time. Yeah, so the tournament's amazing. It's been here for 55 years, since Arthur Ashe helped start it with a vision of putting a tennis tournament at Public Park in 1969. In 1969, all tennis tournaments, for the most part, were in private clubs. The U.S. Open was at a private club, and Arthur said, I'll be part of this tournament as long as you put it in Public Park, and so we put it in Rock Creek Park, which has been a great part of the legacy and really part of the culture of the event. The facility, a permanent stadium, was built with private dollars in 1987, and then handed to the Park Service to maintain, which they really haven't done. And so we've put a lot of lipstick on a pig. So when you come, it looks really good, and it's a really high quality event. I think that people love it. Sold every ticket out for the last 4 years, and it's really become one of the bigger events in the world. But underneath all that, the facility needs repair, and so we're working to try to figure out a path to do that.
Do you see that relying on the city heavily? How are things
Well,
going?
it's owned by National Park Service. I don't think they have money. I mean, this is a whole set. You should have a whole separate Semafor conference about the National Park Service, actually, because it's a thing that is really bad. I mean, it's like they're responsible for some of the great treasures in our country, and they have no money to do anything. And so when you go to national park facilities, the physical beauty is incredible, but the facilities are horrible, and the capital deficit is massive. So tennis stadium's going to be low, probably as it should be. So not that different from what we're trying to do at RFK. The idea, and there's a lot of senior people at the Park Service who recognize this, that they need to think about park land different in urban areas than they do in like the great outdoors. Yosemite and Yellowstone's different from things here, is try to find some way to transfer it. And there's a lot of mechanisms, long-term lease or transfer from the Park Service to the city. And then between the city and us, in both cases, we would figure out a way to, in one case, build something, in the tennis facility, renovate what's there. And so we really would like that to happen.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
You mentioned RFK, so that's also a piece of federal legislation that's, up in the air so far this year. There's been small-scale Senate pushback to it. It seems like it might have a shot. Can you update us on, and this is, so folks know, a bill that would essentially allow the commanders to potentially make RFK their home again?
Well, it's been a lot harder since Joe Maloney left us. And he was the point guy on this and was doing a great job. But yeah, so we need a new stadium for the Commanders. The one we have is it's not close to what it should be. And so and we're not going to renovate it. We're going to build a new one. The RFK is the spiritual home of the team, but it's one of several options. I would say before you think about a football stadium, I think it's unjust that 180 acres of land controlled by the federal government is sitting in Washington, completely sitting fallow, abused, undeveloped, and no real path to do anything when the district needs it for a lot of things. This is 180 acres, a football stadium, but 60. If the land gets transferred to DC, they can build housing, hospitals, schools, parks, all the things that DC needs. And I would say there's a real, separate from football, justice issue with making that happen. If it does happen, a football stadium is one of the things that could be there, and it could be a great catalyst for everything that happens over there. So a bill passed the House in the spring, overwhelmingly, like 90% to 10%. And like a lot of things, it's sitting in the Senate waiting for something to happen. And we think there's massive bipartisan support, but it has to come up and get voted on. And so, with fingers crossed for the city that something can happen before the new Congress, or else, as you know, we have to start over.
Fresh.
And so we're really hopeful that somehow before that happens, that this does pass.
I'm getting very wonky here as a congressional person, but do you think there's a chance like an end-of-year deal might wrap it up so you wouldn't have to have a separate vote?
This isn't my day job, but what I'm told is that there's a hope that at the end of the year, we're not the only, there's tons of stuff piled up. That at the end of the year, there'll be this massive lame duck passage of tons of things. And hopefully this is one. Again, that's just one step in us considering it as a place to build a football stadium. But separate from that, DC should have that land to do something with it. If you go over there, it's spectacular, and it really finishes the city. It's on access from the Lincoln Memorial, Washington Monument, Capitol, and then that. And if you look at what it would do for the city, it would be transformative, and it should happen regardless.
With our remaining time, to pivot back to the guardrails aspect that you mentioned early on in the conversation, there has been federal legislation sponsored by Congressman Tonko, a Democrat, but not really any other ideas, and that bill has a limited number of co-sponsors. Do you see this as a federal problem at all to put guardrails on, or something on the state level that should be considered?
I honestly, I think less about the legislative guardrails and more about from a team and league perspective. And I can't emphasize enough, whether it's tennis or football, how much focus making this safe is. It just can't. And actually, I'm even deeper and been in tennis longer. Tennis is interesting because tennis globally is probably the fourth, fifth, sixth, depending, most popular sport. It's the second most bet on sport. In the United States, it's probably the 7th, 8th, 9th most popular sport to watch, and it's the 4th most popular betting sport. And a lot of it is because what I said, it has so many events that it leads to that. And there's matches all over the world. So wherever you are in the world, you can, after dinner, go and look on a screen and find a match somewhere in the world to bet on. So it lends itself to that. But it's also the downside, just to put sunlight on it, is because a lot of the bets aren't even about winning and losing. It's just a point. It could be subject to manipulation. And, you know, it's kind of amazing, given the amount of players and the amount of matches, how massively and frequently something happens. But it does once in a great while. And the sport is just maniacal about eliminating it to the extent possible or minimizing it. And so, like when our tournament, we get a list of a couple hundred people who aren't allowed on the grounds because they're known globally to be people who come and try to interfere and gamble. And I could get really technical, and it's super interesting about how people try to like front run the score online by being next to the court. So like you're not allowed to bring a laptop to a tennis match because otherwise people would sit there and they would bet on site because they might get a millisecond quicker than someone who's watching it online. So there's all kinds, there's so much. And I was on the board of the USTA for 6 years, and they came and showed us the outfits that some of these 200 people use to try to get in. They literally have full rubber heads to disguise them. And so, but what's really impressive is how much resources and focus go into protecting it. It's really a big deal, and how much education goes into the athletes. And again, I would say a lot of that's because of the sunlight that's been put on by taking it out of the shadows and making it legal, and then reinvesting a lot of the resources into making sure that it's safe.
That's an amazing series of tidbits you just outlined about tennis. Do you think there's a benefit to more like cross-sport collaboration on ways to make that happen?
Yeah, there is, and it's at the federal, it's at all levels. The sport, they have their informal working groups where they share best practices. It happens with the regulators, with the governments at all levels. There's a whole ecosystem of people working to make sure across all sports that it's safe and fair and doesn't get into the integrity of the game. And then the positive side is how we started this is it really does massively add to fan engagement. And that was, again, the aha moment. It really is entertainment amplification. And you just started fantasy football for the first time.
It's true.
I found out, right?
In the office league. I'm doing okay.
And there's 40 million Americans who play fantasy, which has happened a long time. And that's why the NFL is, the everything. It's not the reason, but it's one of the main reasons is people are engaged at a different level because like fantasy is such a big part of it.
Well, we will have to have you back for that National Park Service conversation. I would now love to have
that one I would love.
But we're out of time. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Bennett Richardson with Lori Kalani of DraftKings and Melanie Johnston of MGM.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
two experts with me this time. Thank you both so much for being here. We've got Melanie Johnson, the President and Chief Operating Officer of MGM National Harbor, and Lori Kalani, our Chief Responsible Gaming Officer of DraftKings. So great to have both perspectives of one of the most successful physical casinos in the country, as well as one of the top online gaming platforms. Lori, I'd love to just start with you. What's one key initiative, as you sit here, as we're talking about responsible gaming, that DraftKings has undertaken around responsible gaming that's resonating with your customers?
So that's a great question. From a big picture, we're really working to promote RG awareness to help our customers educate themselves and really develop, healthy gaming habits. So one thing that we did recently was we launched something called My Stat Sheet, which is an interactive sheet of data that all of our customers can see that lets them assess all of their personal stats, so they can see their play over the last month, year, and lifetime of their account. And we believe that that data-driven information will help them to make healthy gaming decisions. And it's gone great so far. We're eliciting feedback from our customers, but what we're seeing so far is, between that and our new RG Center, which is just a really easy to use repository of all of our tools, we're seeing a 10x rate at which people are interacting with those resources.
That's great. That's great to see. Melanie, how do you all handle that at MGM? I have to imagine that with the physical casino, balancing those responsible gaming initiatives with quality kind of guest experiences is something that you're thinking a lot about.
Well, at MGM Resorts, we're taking a holistic approach on how we manage responsible gaming and taking care of our patrons while taking care of our employees as well. What we've done is we've implemented a program called GameSense. And this is a system that we purchased from the British Columbia Lottery Corporation, and it's designed to educate patrons on how to game responsibly, how to set an entertainment budget. But what we've done is we've trained all of our employees. So we have employees that are customer facing, and they get a real in-depth training on how to sense or detect the signs that a patron may be struggling with gaming. And one of the first things we say is, if it's not fun, you should not game. So we've got programs in place where we've certified 500 employees to be advisors, GameSense advisors, of which 160 are at MGM Resorts in National Harbor. And what happens is these guys are proficient in explaining to guests the hows, the whys, the whens, and most importantly, setting an entertainment budget. There has to be a budget. Throughout our property, we've got guides, pamphlets, brochures. We've got messaging on our slot machines, on the digital throughout the gaming floor, at the cage, our MGM Rewards desks and slot pits, on ATM machines, on the check cashing machines, and as well as our ticket redemption machines. And also we have information in all of our hotel rooms. So it's readily available for any guest. Our employees are trained. If they see a customer and the customer is saying, I'm having problems, we pull the customer aside and we immediately contact one of the advisors, and they take them to an office and we sit down and we take a holistic approach where we're very empathetic. We want to understand their concerns. Some of the questions are, what issues are you having right now? Are you sad when you're coming in? Do you feel like you're obligated to play? Have you created a budget? So it's a whole educational process that we're putting in place to help that customer. Also, we've got self-excluded programs that we've incorporated. If a guest says, I'm struggling, we have a program where the customer can voluntarily self-exclude themselves and not game at all. So what happens with MGM Resorts, once the customer exempts themselves from any of our property, they're exempt from all of our properties. So that helps the customer. And another thing we put in play, if the customer decides, I have difficulties budgeting my entertainment funds, we can put them on a no-mail list, exempt them from getting casino credit, exempt them from cashing checks or getting credit card advances, and then putting a limit on the amount that they can game on a daily basis.
Wow, it's amazing to hear such a thorough approach and so deeply integrated into the physical guest experience, which obviously is important for those physical casinos like an MGM National Harbor. Lori, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about sort of the changing face of gaming. The average age of online gamblers is now 34. Younger players becoming an increasingly prominent demographic in terms of trying out these new tools and new apps. Are there any differences when it comes to effectively promoting and developing responsible gaming for younger audiences compared to older audiences?
Well, so we started a place from believing that everybody should know about responsible gaming. This should be, like Melanie said, fun and entertainment. And when it's not fun and entertainment, those customers shouldn't be playing. But with respect to the under 25-year-olds, we do have a specific campaign for them. We want to get that RG information out to that demographic early and often. And so what happens is if somebody under 25 years old signs up for a new account, they are shown the limits and encouraged to use them. But then 5 days later, we contact them again and again encourage them to use the limits. And then on day 14, there's another touch point where we're doing myth busting and trying to educate them and give them some tips on playing. And then we send bi-monthly emails to them. And we follow that up and reinforce it with bi-monthly in-app pop-ups that are sending them messages. So we're trying to really meet that demographic where they are and meet them in real time, also send the emails, and really just drive this healthy gaming behavior. Keep it fun.
Yeah, definitely. That's
because
great to
as
hear.
we say, it's more fun when it's for fun.
Absolutely, like you said, if you're not having fun, then you shouldn't be doing it. And no, I think it's super smart to hear that, how it's integrated not just into that first time experience, but as you're using DraftKings over time. Are there any advice you would have to like other operators? You all have done so much in this space to encourage responsible gaming, especially among younger audiences.
Well, look, I think we all compete, but this is one area where we all need to come together and share best practices and share what we're learning, because we are scaling and innovating and we are learning. We're using customer feedback. And so there's a lot of research out there. I think the more that we as the industry can get together and really be on the same page and send the same message, hopefully this will become a cultural thing where just like I would balance my checkbook, I would make sure that I'm adhering to this budget. So I think that that's really the advice is, at least from my perspective, is I want to talk to all of the other companies and hear what they're doing so we can take the best ideas and implement them.
Definitely. Well, that's great. And you make such a good point there that even though there's a lot of competition in the marketplace, this is a real unified face of the industry. Melanie, wanted to come back to some of the examples that you gave across so many different responsible gaming touch points for the customer across their MGM experience. The casino gaming industry at times has faced skepticism around gambling practices, and is there an authenticity around those responsible gaming measures across all of those things that you're doing and the ways you're addressing those with the customers? Are there certain forms of promoting responsible gaming or certain like tools that you all have developed that you feel like has truly landed and resonated with customers and made the biggest impact?
The biggest impact for us has come through GameSense. It's a phenomenal platform that we're using on a day-to-day basis. And what we're doing to keep our employees well-trained and well-versed on the subject matter, we have refresher courses every year. This year, in particular, in September, since it's Responsible Gaming Education Month, MGM Resorts has contributed $440,000 for research with the International Center for Responsible Gaming, as well as the Kind Bridge Research Institute. We're going to take the results of those studies, which will be done by gaming operators as well as academics, and incorporate those into our GameSense programs to ensure that we've got the best practices out there so we can provide this knowledge, this information, and this training to both our employees and our guests when they come on our property. So it's a constant evolution of what we're doing, reinforcement, and then being hands-on on a day-to-day, and it's just part of our culture. It's become organic for MGM Resorts.
Absolutely. And at that point on integrating it into the employee culture, obviously you all employ more than 3,000 people here in Maryland, having that be a big part of the culture, that makes a lot of sense. We're a little low on time, but before we go, when we think about gaming today, I mean, innovation comes to mind. Technology. There's always new experiences in person at the casino. There's always new innovations in the apps and in experiences like DraftKings. Lori, we start with you, but we'd love to hear from both of you. Just as technology is advancing, what are you most excited about with the future of the gaming industry?
I'm most excited about the ability to use machine learning and models that can help us continue to learn and continue to look for things. So for example, we are now using machine learning to monitor all communications with DraftKings. So everything that a customer writes in about, we're using that machine learning to identify where there may be potentially problematic behavior. And when we recognize that, we then send that to our dedicated player protection team, who is trained and refreshed and trained and refreshed and trained to really interact with those customers and understand where we can possibly help them, whether it's limit setting or taking a break or setting alerts. So I think as the technology improves, we will improve and we will continue to scale, and we will continue to try to make sure that all of our customers are on our platform, are having a good time and using it for entertainment purposes.
That's great. No, it seems like such a useful way to implement AI and machine learning to get those actionable insights, to keep it, like you said, keep it fun and responsible. Melanie, what about you? What sort of innovations get you excited about the future of gaming over at MGM?
Well, very similar. AI, of course, is the wave of the future, and we're taking advantage of that. But what we're excited about is we can take advantage of AI, but we still have that human interaction with it. So we have the personal touches with the guest to ensure that our guests are coming, they're happy, we're providing something for them, because we want to ensure that this is a happy entertainment experience. So it's a combination of AI with that human connection.
That's great. That's great. And like you both said, keeping it fun, it seems like lots of ways to do that. Thank you both again so much for being here. And thanks again to the American Gaming Association for their partnership. We are going to welcome up Congresswoman Dina Titus in just a moment. We'll be interviewing with Alana Shore, our senior Washington editor. So thank you both. Great job, y'all.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Let's welcome Nevada Democratic Congresswoman Dina Titus. She represents Las Vegas, so she's... So you have a very unique perspective on sports betting and the role the federal government can and should play. But I want to start with kind of a bigger picture question in an election year. How has online betting changed the economy of your home state and your hometown? It must be a huge cultural shift, sea change. What has that been like?
Well, first, let me thank you for doing this. This is such an important topic, and tell you that if you want to know about gaming and the money side of it and how it benefits states, you can ask our state treasurer, Zach Conine, who is in the audience. So I'm glad to see him. He can keep me straight for whatever I might tell you. You know, after COVID, Las Vegas went from having 35% unemployment, the worst in the country, like Great Depression, to now being the fastest recovering. And a lot of that is because of tourism, hospitality, and gaming. Everybody wanted to get out and have fun, and so this is where they came. And that includes all aspects of entertainment and gaming. You know, one of the things that we have to tell as our story, and the gaming caucus that I co-chaired tries to do this to our fellow members, is how much gaming does contribute to the states. So many of the states were short of revenue after COVID, you know, money for schools. The federal government gave them a lot, but still the revenue was way down. And this gaming has helped to bring it back. You can look at New York as a good example of that, not just Nevada. So it's helped to fill those gaps that existed within states' budgets.
Looking to legislation on, online betting in particular, the SAFE Act is the name for the Paul Tonko sponsored legislation. He's a colleague. You have, however, called this bill, which he has introduced in the past, a bad idea. Can you talk about what kind of guardrails you might think are better ideas for the federal level, if at all, or if the state level is a better idea to start imposing any limits?
Well, for many years, gaming just kind of kept its head down and played defense. We didn't want the federal government looking at what we were doing. Better to have state regulation, because if the federal government got involved, they'd put in another layer of rules, and then they could possibly put in some taxes, and we wanted to avoid all of that. Now, however, that gaming has spread all over the country except Hawaii and Utah, and sports betting is in about 2/3 of the states and Washington, D.C., we can no longer hide. And so if you look at legislation that's been introduced right now, there are about 6 bills that are on the agenda, and we are playing offense and defense. Now, the SAFE Act that Tonko has, and he chairs the Addiction Caucus, so you put it in that context, includes the previous bill that he introduced, which was against all advertising for sports betting. This bill now puts restrictions on advertising, but goes much further than that, calls for a big study. Now, you know, when they call for a study, that's always dangerous because you don't know where that's going to go, and it just becomes a foot in the door. Calls for those studies, calls for restrictions on advertising, but also restrictions on when you can gamble, how much you can gamble, when you have to stop gambling, those kinds of things. I don't think that's the way to approach it. I certainly support responsible gaming. The industry does. They've taken bold steps going back to the 90s to regulate themselves. And I think that's better to have self-regulation or state regulation, not have the federal government get involved at this level.
One particular public health related issue that, Tonko has discussed, but is kind of a specific state level question right now, is indoor smoking in casinos. Casinos are one of the few places left in America where you can still smoke indoors. And in New Jersey, casino workers are currently trying to ban it, citing the public health effects. Would you support a similar ban in Nevada? Do you think anything else should be done, if not a ban?
Well, this is something that the state legislature has looked at off and on. And again, you find the industry regulating itself. If you go anywhere practically on the Strip with all the new casinos, they have the very latest technology. It's not the low-ceilinged, old-time places that are so smoky that you find a few left downtown, but they've done a pretty good job. Even some of the slot machine banks have filters on the side that suck out the bad air. So I would challenge you to go in places like that and find that it will be a very smoky atmosphere. But secondhand smoke is certainly something to take into consideration, not just for customers, but for employees.
So, do you hear from constituents at all who are concerned about this, being exposed on the job?
Well, not lately because of all the improvements that have been made. And, and this is an issue that the union, the culinary union, is very influential in politics in Nevada. And so if they make it an issue and get the state legislature engaged in it, I think you might find some movement on it.
Interesting. To pivot back to the Gaming Caucus, which you mentioned you are a co-chair of, obviously legislation like Tonko's and the others that are on the table are one part of what you do. Tell me and us more about what else the Gaming Caucus does. Is there an awareness raising aspect to all of this?
Well, there absolutely is, because gaming is new to many jurisdictions. And also where it exists, it's not like Las Vegas, my district, where it's everything. It's like a little piece of the economic pie, and it's a small part of employment. But two things. Often members of Congress don't realize what the contributions of gaming are, whether it's in constructing the facility, hiring people at good wages, entertainment that brings folks from other places, ancillary businesses, and tax revenue. And you have to kind of lay all that out for them. This is what gaming will bring to your community. Second, they don't realize just how complex an issue it is. There is so much regulation of gaming. I mean, many layers, local, state, federal. You think the federal government's not involved, but think about the IRS, the Treasury, Indian Affairs, Commerce. There's lots of different layers. And so people will come to us and ask us questions about how exactly does it work? And so we provide not just advocacy for the industry, but also a real education function. Now, my co-chair is from a state where you just have small gaming kind of in rural communities. So we kind of bring both ends of the spectrum to bear.
Interesting. To go back to Las Vegas, your home base for a moment, there was a time when pro sports kind of avoided Las Vegas, but now it's the fastest growing sports hub in the US.
Right.
It's hosting the Super Bowl, NFL, NHL, MLS teams are flocking to the area. What has that been like, that reversal for you back home?
Well, we say if it's happening in District 1 because all of that is in my district. We have the stadium, we have the Aces. How about those Aces? I mean, they're fabulous. Yes, they deserve applause. But they are flocking there. And it's bringing a new set of people to visit. You can imagine all the general aviation and the special jet planes that come in privately to these events. F1 races coming up here in about a month. That's another group of people. The Raiders finally won a game. You know, they're bringing people. I can tell you that these are new folks. The Raiders are not the ballet crowd. When they have a tailgate party, get ready. So it's you're right. It is a whole new dynamic. We were gaming, then we became a foodie town. Now a shopping and entertainment town, and now a sports town. We're getting a baseball team. That's really moving fast, and I'm sure that basketball won't be far behind. Men's basketball.
How has it changed how you think about online gaming and gaming in general, if at all? Because obviously a lot of these games people are betting on.
That's right. And that's fine. We want to see that, and we encourage it. And it's not just betting in Las Vegas. It's betting everywhere. Well, not everywhere, but 38 states, I think, or a number of states. You know, when sports betting first spread, and we started to hear a few scandals about some of the different teams or some of the different players, we sent a letter from my office. Jeremy Marsh does our gaming. Some of you may know him. If not, you should get to know him. To all the leagues and the NCAA, because this is a college issue too, saying, what are your policies when it comes to betting in terms of your team members, the people who work for the staff? How do you assure us that the bets will be honored and that the games will be fair? Because we don't want people betting on themselves or cheating or anything like that. There have been some scandals. And there was a good response from all the leagues. And I think they have kind of cleaned up their whole efforts. They've made them more transparent. They've pushed for more annual education of their whole operation so they know what the policies are. And when somebody violates a policy, they enforce it. And I think that's the key. If the scandals that make the news show that the system is working, but we want to stop it before it happens. If they were to continue, then there would be more pressure for the federal government to get engaged, and that's something that we want to avoid if we can.
Fascinating. One other aspect of all this that one version of the Tonko bill did address is AI.
Mm-hmm.
Proposing guardrails on how AI is used to sort of give online bettors particular advantages or moments. Are you concerned at all about this? I mean, there's a lot of talk about AI in general and imposing guardrails, but specifically for online betting, does that keep you up at night at all?
Well, AI period keeps me up at night because you can see how it's used in politics. You can make anybody look like anything and say anything. And so in sports betting, who knows where it goes. I think that's one of the challenges that gaming is facing. You know, it's a whole new world, whether it's iSports or AI or Bitcoin. You know, the regulatory field is wide open in these areas, and I think it's going to be a challenge that we'll have to address. I think that advertising, when Tonko and some of those want to eliminate advertising because it entices people to come and gamble, I think you're looking at that half full, half empty. Advertising, I think, is a good thing in the sense that it lets people know which are the legal, legitimate sports betting sites, because a lot of people may not know that they're betting on some illegal site. You know, you just go on the internet and 1,000 pop up. So if they have slightly better odds, and they're convenient, then people will use them. If they see advertising and they know which ones contribute to responsible gaming, guarantee the results, you know you're going to get paid, you're not going to get ripped off. I think that is a plus for advertising. So as we look at regulation, let's keep that in mind.
Interesting. To totally switch gears for a moment, because it's a big issue in your state and in politics right now, both presidential candidates have proposed taxing tips. Removing the taxes on tips for service workers. Now, big issue in Las Vegas, in your home state. They're very different proposals, the Trump and Harris campaigns. Where do you fall on either of these versions? Trump's being probably a little more expansive. And have you talked to the Harris campaign about your views at all on this?
Well, it's hard for me to say which I support, because I don't think either one of them have fleshed out the details. I mean, we don't know really how they're going to make either one of them work. I have come out with a position that I would support no tax on tips if you accompany that with a raise in the minimum wage, because a lot of people don't make enough tips to get taxed. You're just talking about the high-end rooms and the people who make the big tips. Maybe some housekeepers don't make very much tips, so they're not going to benefit from this. So if you're looking at something that really benefits people, you've got to accompany that with an increase in the minimum wage.
And that is something, yes, you're right. Nothing's been fleshed out firmly, but the Harris campaign has.
And in Nevada, you know, in some states, you have a lower minimum wage for tip earners because the assumption is that the tip will make up the difference. That's not true in Nevada. Over the years, going back to the culinary union and the role that hospitality plays in the Nevada economy, we have eliminated that gap.
Interesting. And while we're on the subject of your swing state, care to offer us any assessment of where things stand in Nevada? And is this a neck and neck race?
Well, you know, you're right. Nevada is a swing state. It's a purple state. It's always been, you know, we're very independent. Don't get on my farm or ranch and don't come in my bedroom. But people are ticket splitters in Nevada. You'll have a senator who's a Democrat, a governor who's a Republican, or vice versa. That's been tradition for a long time. And races are won very small margins. Catherine Cortez Masto won last time, I think, by like 1% or even less than 1%. So we will fight to the last day for the last vote, knocking on the last door and not take anything for granted. I can tell you, though, that the national race for president has gotten closer. Trump was way ahead of Biden, depending on the polls, 7 to 10 points. And now most of the polls show that Kamala Harris and Trump even in the national polls. Our Senate race shows the Democrat is ahead, and the 3 House races have not been targeted by the Republicans, because even though they're close and they're frontline races, they seem to be doing better on the Democratic side, and the Republican candidates are less well-funded and less well-known.
To move back to gaming, thank you to the audience for indulging my slight pivot to national politics. In the gaming caucus, you know, do you have sort of a personal conversation? I'm curious with colleagues, because everybody's trying online betting these days. I mean, I imagine even members of Congress. Do people ask you, how does this work? Tell me how to do it. Does it get like that?
Well, I think they figured out how to do it. Sometimes they might ask for my advice of who they think's going to win, but I'm not very good at the prognosticating. So the conversations usually don't get to that level, but you're right. Everybody's doing it. I heard a question earlier about young people. How do you get responsible gaming information to young people? And the answers were, you know, I think they call it touch points and all that. You should also not overlook working with our colleges and universities to get that information out. I think that's an important addition to that.
That's interesting.
But I would say Asia Wilson, you can bet on her anytime.
You heard it here first, guys. You know, going back to the Tonko bill for a moment and its proposed limits on advertising, you know, it all goes back to, as you mentioned, he is a chair of the Addiction Caucus. You know, have you had frank conversations with him or other colleagues about, you know, this being something you care about and the idea that the industry might also be willing to have a discussion?
I have. He's a friend. He and I came in the same class, so we've known each other for a long time. He feels very strongly about this, and I think he's well intended. I think he's just misdirected because he doesn't have a real sense of how the whole system works. So I've talked to him about it, but this is a good example of how there's still a stigma against gaming, even though it's spread so far and it's so legitimate now and it creates so many jobs. You still have to watch your back in legislation. You may find a little piece here or a little piece there that discriminates against the industry. There's still a little bit of stigma, and it's pretty easy to kind of attack. It's just like sin taxes. Go after the sin taxes first. And you find that. I just made a list. There are, we're talking about we kept our head down and didn't want to see much happen. But right now there are 5 major pieces of legislation pending out there. There's the slot tax, raising the cap on slot winnings. There's the sports betting. There's advertising. There's a lot happening in this world. Now, as far as Tonko's bill, it's partly a messaging bill. I don't see it passing, certainly not this session. Probably nothing's going to pass this session, but we don't want it to get ahead of steam and going forward.
I mean, there's also the revenue question that you raised too, right? I mean, is it a concern for you that the longer these bills sit out there and the more bills there are, then suddenly gaming becomes like an easy extra revenue source the next time you want to offset something in a few years?
Well, remember when states started first looking at gaming as a way to fill those financial gaps, because state legislatures don't want to, raise taxes. So it was lotteries. They were looking at lotteries as going to be the kind of fund education. What happened was that lotteries didn't pay off to the extent that they thought they would. And also state legislatures then didn't use lotteries as supplemental funding. They used it as replacement funding. So we want to be sure that that doesn't then move on to other kind of gaming at the federal level, because they're always looking for something to grab.
As a congressional reporter, yes, there's always a new idea to raise revenue. If you could talk about the slot tax in particular, just your views on that one bill, since I don't know if the audience is familiar.
Yeah, I was thinking that did it have an acronym? No, GRIT is the acronym for the opposition. Let's see. Jeremy, do we have an acronym for the slot tax?
Congress loves its acronyms.
Yeah, no, I don't think I'm clever enough to come up with an acronym, but anyway, the slot tax would, when it was put in place, it was to be used for going after illegal gaming. And so the only people who paid it were Nevada and then a little bit of New Jersey. So I decided, well, where is this money? How much is it and what are we using it for? So we called called Treasury and the IRS and said, what's going on with this? They couldn't even find the money. They didn't know where it was. It had just gone into the general fund. So I thought, well, why would we have a slot tax if it's not being used for what it was intended for? Or if we had a slot tax, it should go back to the states. So this bill would eliminate that 0.025 slot tax on handle, but also there's a $50 head tax on every employee. So what you are doing is putting a burden on the legal sports betting and, you're putting a burden on, and well, now I've gotten the sports betting and the slot tax confused. When you put the tax on the, all right, let me start over.
We're good.
You see, this is confusing. That I've even gotten it confused. You take the 0.25 off the handle and the $50 off of the employee for the sports
off the per
book.
head tax for employees.
Yeah, for the sports book. That's that. Now the slot situation is where you are taking the cap off what you win in a slot machine. So let's keep those two separate. You got the sports betting issue with that tax and the slot machine issue with raising the cap on the win, so that you aren't reporting to the IRS until you hit $5,000 as opposed to $1,200, which has been a cap in place since the 70s.
Fascinating. I would spend a lot more time talking about this, but we are out of time. Congresswoman, thank
not
you. I'm going to turn it back over to Bennett.
All right,
It was a real pleasure.
No, my pleasure. Thank you.
right, everybody. That concludes our program for today. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you again to Bill Miller and the American Gaming Association for your partnership on today's event. We'll be back next month with a bunch of other great events. We'll be back here in the Great Hall. We'll have a Principals Live on advanced manufacturing on October 21st. We'll have a launch event for Semafor Middle East and Semafor Gulf that week as well. And then at the end of that week, October 24th and 25th, we'll have our fall edition of the World Economy Summit during the World Bank and IMF fall meetings. If you happen to be up in New York next week for the UN General Assembly, we also have a number of events up going on out there. Energy and sustainability, our next 3 billion summit next Tuesday, and a whole bunch more. So thanks again for joining us. Appreciate it.